So tonight's meeting is going to basically be two parts. One part is going to be talking about reproduction, and the other second half of the meeting is going to be talking about how to tell when your animal is ready to harvest. So we will be looking at how to tell if that animal would likely grade choice or prime or select or whatever. But to start with, we're going to talk about reproduction. And the first couple of slides here, I actually took from a course I was attending earlier this year at Texas A&M online. It was a Zoom course where they were talking about meat production. And at the end of the 3 days of meeting, they had one speaker that talked about profitability for cow-calf producers, and he talked all about reproduction. So this is a slide that he started out, and what I'd like to start out with to kind of start our conversation is that there's a lot of things in our world over which we have no control but do impact us. Weather is going to affect us, land prices, feed costs, COVID is certainly affecting us. And sometimes it's a positive way, sometimes it's a negative way, but there's nothing we can do. So we just have to kind of accept, and hopefully we don't worry much about those. But there are a lot of things that we can actively manage that will help us be better producers of quality meat products or quality animals to sell. They have varying degrees of impact on our profitability. So we can deal with soil health or forage health, you know, work with the genetics, and they all help us reach our goals. But the number one thing that really impacts profitability is reproduction, the size of our calf crop. So that's what I really wanted to talk about in the first half of this, is to show the importance of having good reproduction and having a sizable calf crop. So this speaker from Texas A&M shared a bunch of quotes, and I just took some of them here that kind of drill home the idea of reproduction as being the key to profitability in our beef business. So the first one there, reproductive efficiency is the most important factor impacting the economics of a cow-calf operation. The second one here, the economic value of reproduction for cow-calf producers was reported to be 5 times greater than calf growth. Here, the Gelby marketing program analyzed 110,000 records and found that the relative economic weight of reproduction growth and product, or the carcass traits, was in a ratio of 4 to 2 to 1, meaning reproduction rates was 4 times more economically important than the carcass traits in determining your profitability. And then S. Beavers, who's a current beef economist with Texas A&M, and that's basically all he does is study beef economics, says, in the grand scheme of management things, just give me one more calf to sell. That's the key to becoming more profitable. So when we talk about reproduction, there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but what I really want to narrow the conversation down tonight to is the number of calves marketed per the number of cows exposed. So that's what's really most important, is that in terms of economics. These other things are all important, and we might talk about them at a future presentation, but I'm not going to focus on them tonight. So almost all of the material that I saw out there that talks about reproduction ties reproduction to the body condition, both at the time of breeding and at the time of calving. And there's a very strong relationship between the two. And so this professor at Texas A&M at this course I was taking looked at 2 different studies, and then he averaged them. And he found that if your cattle were in body condition score 3, the one research said you would have about 50% of your animals getting bred. Another was maybe 75%. So the average was just a little over 60%. And as you increase body condition score, 5 and 6 are kind of considered ideal. You begin to reach those pregnancy rates of 90%, which is where we should be. And then as they get too fat, it begins to affect reproduction negatively. So we want to monitor our body condition and manage our body condition. So I'm going to be getting back to those 2 concepts in a little bit, but first I want to talk more about the economics of the value of condition scoring. So using the data on the previous slide, we saw that when you change your condition score from a 3 to a 4, you improved your conception rate by 17%. Going from a 4 to 5, you improved it an additional 12%. And then going from a 5 to 6, you improved it an additional 5%. In other words, going from a 3 to 6, if you add that up, that's about 34% more calves you'll get as a percentage. So there's a couple of assumptions here that I want to make as I move forward with this little economic analysis. One is that what's considered the standard is that 93% of our cows in our herd should successfully get bred, not 100%. So we have to accept that we're going to have some open cows, or we're going to have some cows that lose a calf either in the gestation period or prior to weaning. And for the rest of this little economic analysis, I'm going to assume that each calf is worth $700 when we sell it. So if you do the math with those two things, a 1% increase in pregnancy rate is worth about $6.51 per cow exposed. So taking that further, we can now put dollar values to those improvements in conception rate of $111 for changing from 3 to 4 and so forth. And if we add those all up, that comes to $221. If we go from a 3, condition score 3, like this animal, to 6 at time of breeding, we're going to have this much increased revenue for each percentage point there. So if we go the final bit of math, is if you change your average condition score from 3 to 6 and you have 10 brood cows that you're breeding, take 10 times $221, the increased revenue, the increased amount of money that ends up in your pocket when you sell the calves that are born from those 10 brood cows is $2,210. And so there's a very strong association or link between body condition score and economics. So we're going to take a look at this in another way, and I'll explain this chart here on the left. The numbers here on the right is what, for the last 2 years, what New York prices have been for a 550-pound weaned calf at an auction barn. So going back to this chart here, we have these 4 numbers here, 550 to 850. That's our examples of annual cost to keep a cow on your farm for a year, a brood cow. And then in this left column, we have the percent weaned, and we're looking again at this number of calves weaned per number of cows exposed at 94%, 89%, down to 80%. And then we're assuming in this particular case that our calves are 500 pounds when we sell them, and these remaining numbers here are the break even in dollars per hundredweight that we would need to sell those calves for in order to make money. So in other words, if our cost of production to keep 1 cow on our farm for a year is $550, and we have an 80% number of calves weaned for the number exposed, we need to capture at least $138 per hundredweight at the sale barn in order to break even. So here's a nice set of weaned calves that are probably going to go to a sale barn. And I looked at last Friday's New York summary report for 500-pound steers and heifers sold in the state of New York at all of the auction markets in New York, where there was a USDA market reporter there to record the prices. So the feeder steers that were 500 pounds averaged 128, and the 500-pound heifers averaged 122. So I highlighted there the 2 places where we would be profitable in this particular scenario of selling 500-pound calves. Basically what the point I want you to take from this particular chart is we need to, if we're interested in making money, we need to try to reduce our input costs, the cost of keeping a cow on our farm, and try to increase our reproduction success rate so that we will be profitable. That'll be easier for us to make money. So as I said, that's all kind of associated with body condition scoring. So I wanted to share a couple of examples of how to body condition score, and then we'll actually test ourselves. So there's a lot of great resources out there. I'm going to share 3 of them with you tonight of places you can go to find information on how to body condition score your beef cattle. So the first one here that I'm going to be working through is K-State Guide to Body Condition Scoring. So if you just Googled this, you should be able to find that. So for those of you that are attending tonight, I will be sending you a PDF of this presentation tomorrow in your email. So you'll be able to look at all of this. So you don't need to take that many notes. So in this publication, there's a picture of an animal and it shows the different areas that we can look at a live animal to try to get clues as to how it would condition score. So there's the spine, the hooks and pins, the tail head, the ribs, both the 4 ribs and the 12th and 13th rib, the amount of cover there, the brisket is a good place that you can also look. And so then you can see that the body condition score system for cattle runs from 1 to 9. 1 and 2 being very thin animals, overconditioned animals are 7, 8, and 9. Borderline are 3 and 4, and optimum condition where we want them at breeding and at calving is a 5 or 6. So then we can look at the different columns and see what it says and get an idea when we look at the animal. And we're going to go through a couple of examples of this. If you are fortunate enough to be able to get in with your cattle and touch them, you can begin to palpate different areas and they'll even help you determine body condition score even more easily. So in this case, this particular farmer works his cattle every day and he goes out and he interacts with them every day. So it's very easy for him. Other of us may need to bring them through a chute, and when they're in the chute like this, then we could begin to palpate the animal. And there's a lot of additional information here. Like for a condition score 5, the 12th and 13th ribs are not visible to the eye, but the transverse process, which would be right in here, you would be able to feel that. You won't see it visually, but if you get your hand on it, you can feel it. So that's additional information that you can look at. So let's go through a couple of body condition scores here. We have body condition score 3. And so here, if you look at the spine, we can clearly see the spine, and you can also slightly see the spine in the body condition 4. You can still see it there, and some of the transverse process you can see. The ribs are quite visible in body condition score 3, and the 4 ribs, if you look carefully enough, you can see some evidence of this, and you're certainly going to be able to feel that. The hooks and pins on the animal are quite visible. The tail head, there's going to be no fat in the tail head. And there's going to be no fat in the brisket of the animal. And this animal actually got so thin that it's beginning to use some of its muscle mass for energy and has lost a little bit of muscling. In body condition score 4, it would have full muscling. So looking at body condition score 5s and 6, you can see that the spine is no longer clearly visible, or the transverse process isn't visible. The ribs are really no longer visible. The hooks and pins are still slightly visible. The tail head in the condition score 5, there really isn't much for visible fat, but in 6, you're going to begin to see some fat there. And in the brisket, there's no fat yet deposited in the brisket, and there is some fat starting to get deposited in the brisket of an animal that has body condition score 6. And if we go to 7 and 8, these are animals that are probably a little bit over-conditioned. The spine's no longer visible, the ribs aren't visible, the hooks and pins are only slightly visible, if at all. The tail head has beginning to have a fair amount of fat in it. The brisket is also beginning to have a fair amount of fat in it. So those are ways that you can condition score. So now I'm going to pause and we're going to try a couple of polls, and you get to try this out for yourself. So these 2 animals, one is from a University of Arkansas publication. So if you Google that, you can find these pictures. And here's a University of Georgia example set of pictures. Okay, so on this particular animal, I want you to decide if you would consider that animal a thin animal, condition score 1, 2, 3, or 4. An optimum condition 5 or 6, or overly conditioned 7, 8, or 9. Animals would have condition scored a 6. And here we have another example. And so now I want you to tell me the actual score. So the one on the left is from the University of Arkansas publication, and the one on the right is the University of Georgia. And so when I looked at these two, I was also a little bit confused. I thought I saw an awful lot of rib here and transverse process. It maybe it's just an empty cow, but they said that this was a condition score of 4, as is this animal. So the according to the two publications, excuse me, these animals are body condition score of 4. But we were all pretty close, 3 or 4. This one I probably would have said a 3 if I didn't know that the publication said it was a 4. All right, I'm going to talk about a few more things in reproduction. One is the role of nutrition in total herd health, and it might be useful to know if we don't have the animals in the condition we want, what do we need to do to get them into the condition where we do want them nutritionally? And so that's what this slide is really talking about. And so one of the notes I put here is the second one, each unit change in body condition score means it's about 60 to 80 pounds, depending on the frame of the animal, of body weight, live body weight. So we'll go ahead and start on this table on the right. This is the weight changes needed by calving time and general feed recommendations for beef cows. So this is when you wean your animals, you're 2 to 3 months away from them calving again, and you go out and condition score them. So if you have animals that are condition scoring 1 or 2, they need to gain an awful lot of weight, and they shouldn't have been that thin in your system. And so they would be good candidates to calve. They're probably not pregnant. If they were pregnant, they probably lost their pregnancy. They're just really thin, and they're actually using some of their own body's muscle mass to stay alive. Condition score of 3 needs to gain 200 to 300 pounds in those 2 to 3 months. It's probably going to need a little bit of grain. Condition score of 4, if you want her to calve in at a condition score of 6, probably need some really high quality forage. 5 and 6, the only weight gain you want them to have is the actual fetus, the growth of the fetus. 7, you don't want any weight gain at all, so they just need a fair forage. And 8 and 9 they need to go on some sort of diet and actually lose some weight. And in fact, if you have an animal that of condition score 9, I might consider culling that animal as well. So the second chart here is talking about, okay, what when you say good forage, fair forage, excellent forage, what does that mean? So this talks about the same 90 to 120 day period. They actually divided it out on this chart. We have some numbers related to crude protein and numbers related to TDN, which is what you would read on your forage report for an estimate of the amount of energy. And so if you're in 5 or 6, you're pretty close to where you want to be. And so if that's where you're at, you don't really want them changing much. So you'd be looking for a lower protein forage, and the TDNs could be in the low 50s. But if they need to be gaining weight, they're in condition score of 3 or 4, you're looking for a much higher quality forage, something in the mid 60s might be desirable. And if they are a condition score of 7, you're going to try to find the worst forage on the farm and make them work a little so they hopefully lose a little weight. So these are just some clues to help you if you go out and condition score your animals and you find them to be either thin or a little bit heavy. It might help you decide how you want to group your animals and feed them accordingly so that at calving time, you've got them in that ideal body condition where calving should be easy, there shouldn't be problems, and your animals all get off to a great start. I want to talk a little bit about replacement heifers. So a lot of people, if you're at a steady state and you have pretty good reproduction, you might decide to retain 20 to 25% of your heifers. So that's more heifers than you actually need, but you're going to hold on to them and look at them a little while, and you'll have an opportunity to cull down from there. So if your reproduction rates aren't as high as 90%, then maybe you might save a few more if you're trying to be at a steady state. The next 3 things in this list are things that you're going to kind of think about in terms of those prospective replacements that you're holding back. One is their weaning weights. Another is the EPD. So we can look at what their perceived genetic value is on paper by looking at their EPDs, but we also want to know that's just an estimate. We also want to see how they are actually doing. So if you have some animals that are nice and growthy and they're doing well and those would be the animals that you would want to be holding on. You want to ideally, from the standpoint of profitability, to be breeding heifers to calve in at 24 months of age. So that means ideally at the 15 months that I just mentioned, they'd be close to 65% of the dam's body weight. And then it should be pretty easy to continue them on the growth plane and the nutritional plane to support the gestation from there, so they calve in nice and easy at 24 months of age. Those animals, if you have to wait an extra year before you get a calf, that's a whole extra year of feeding an animal that you have to ultimately recoup, and it might take you a couple more calvings to finally break even on that cow. And then you want a pregnancy check and call the open. That's why I suggested you may want to keep a few more than what you actually need, so that you can potentially cull any that happen to be open when you do your pregnancy check. And you may want to breed to have your heifers calved, and you should breed to have your heifers calve ahead of the cows. This is because the first calf heifer, when she has her first calf, she's still actively growing, and it takes her an extra 2 to 4 weeks before she will start to cycle. So if you want her calving at the same time as the rest of the cows when she calves for the second time, you need to have her get started a little bit early in that first calving. So you want to breed those heifers 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the rest if you can make that work in your system. And body condition score matters. Body condition score of 5 or greater. These heifers will start to cycle earlier and be more likely to get pregnant. The next thing I want to talk about is controlling your calving season and to cull your open cows. Controlling your calving season, I know that many of us kind of just keep a bull out there with our animals all the time. If we can find a way to control our calving season and get all of our calves born in a shorter window, there's a lot of things that become easier for us as managers. We'll have reduced labor. It's going to be easier to time our animals for the markets when we perceive that our markets are going to be best. We'll optimize our returns. Feed efficiency gets better. Grouping becomes more easy when all of our animals are more uniform in terms of where they are in their life stage. So if you right now have an uncontrolled breeding season, I suggest starting with keeping a bull in there first year for 180, the second year 120, the third year 90, and then move down to 60 days. So this here is a study that was done in University of Florida, and it's an old study, but in 1953, only 44% of the cows in this group where the bull was in there continuously were getting pregnant in any year, and the weaning weights, when they weaned them, their average weaning weights were quite low. And then they started this process of starting to control their calving season, and within 3 years, their rate of pregnancy went up to 82% and their weaning weights went up. And then, before, 6 or 7 years later, they were up to 94% pregnancy rates and weaning weight of 508 pounds. And a lot of this is due to these factors here, where you just get better and more efficient at caring for the animals when you have a tighter culling season or calving season. And you'll have to cull cows to make this happen.
Question.
Okay.
Back to that previous slide, it doesn't account for the time of year.
Oh, right. So when I say controlling your calving season, each one of you will have to decide when you want your calving season to be, and you may decide you want a spring calving and a fall calving, but you'll kind of have an intentional calving season.
Right, but I get that, but is that weaning weight based on like what they did versus a fall or a spring calving? And is one of them optimal for weaning weight?
that's a question where I would have to sit down and ask several questions of you to know what your market is and what you're trying to do. But I can explain some of the first questions there. That this was when 1953, these herds were, the bull was with them year round, and the calves were being born at any time of the year, just depending on when they got pregnant. And the weaning weights, I suspect, were lower because they probably had specific times of the year where they were weaning, putting these animals on a truck and sending them down the road. So once they had an intentional controlled calving season, whenever that was, then most of those calves were being born at the same time, and they were more uniform in size, and maybe they were targeting a different market, and that's why their weaning weight went up. Essentially what happened is they increased their management in multiple areas on the farm to make this happen. Does that help answer the question some?
Yeah, I was wondering if it was related to forage or the time of year, but yes, it does help. Thanks.
So when you choose when you want your calving to take place, those are really good questions to ask, because the cheapest food we have and some of the highest nutritional feed we have is the early spring pasture. So that's some of the easiest times to get enough nutrition in there and get good growth rates. And so that's why many of us calve in the spring. But then if you're selling in the fall, if you think back a couple of slides, the prices that we receive for weaned calves, if we're selling them into an auction market, are typically the lowest in September and October when we're wanting to sell. So some people will then want to switch to fall calving, and then they're going to be selling their weaned animals in the spring when the prices are much higher. But you will have probably more costs because at that time you're going to be feeding a cow with a calf on it during the winter when we are feeding our stored expensive feeds and not the cheap pasture. So those things go into the decision as to decide, do I want to be calving in the fall, in the spring, or whenever. And it also be a function of when and how you're selling the animals. If you're finishing all of your animals and you're trying to have a year-round market, you might decide to have two calving seasons so that you'll always have a set of cattle that you can choose from to take into the butcher most months of the year.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things I wanted to talk about real quickly here is the breeding soundness exam. About or up to 20% of bulls that are used have a problem that reduces their fertility, and about 8% of bulls have been shown to have a low enough sex drive that it impacts the pregnancy rates. In other words, they're a little bit lazy, or it takes them longer to recover between breedings. Maybe they're a little bit too heavy, or maybe they've lost too much weight and they just won't settle as many cows. And what's really kind of discouraging is when the breeding failure is the bull's fault, and that we didn't know it. I always feel a lot for the people when I go out to their farm and they say that my bull didn't get anybody bred for the first 2 months. I don't really know what happened, or maybe it was too hot when I first went out there and my bull just wasn't working. So it's a good idea to do a breeding soundness exam so that you make sure that when you're trying to get your animals bred, that your bull is doing the job it's supposed to. So a breeding soundness exam is basically a systematic veterinary examination of the bull, and it results in the prediction of the potential fertility. It's not guaranteeing that the bull's going to work or not. It's going to say most likely this bull is going to be very successful. It's typically done 30 to 60 days pre-breeding, and it involves a physical exam, an exam of some of the reproductive system, the scrotum, the penis, a semen analysis, both for morphology of the semen and the motility of the semen or the sperm. Structure and gait, we need that animal to be standing on good legs and be able to mount. We want the animal in good body condition, at least a 5, if not a 6, because it's going to lose condition during this breeding season. And it should have good vision. We want these bulls to be able to see the cows that they're trying to service. And as a rule of thumb, a healthy bull should be able to service 36 to 40 females. And if you're using a younger bull, there's this old adage here that 1 female per month of the bull age up to 36. So if you're using a 24-month-old bull, you probably don't want to have more than 24 cattle with it. So, okay, management tools. This is my summary slide. The management tools for achieving success in your repro program. Have a clear set of farm goals and benchmark targets. Know what you're going for. Consider a controlled calving season to make a lot of the work more easy. Get your nutrition right, feed for a condition score so we get the animals in the condition we want, both at the time of breeding and at calving. And that includes minerals. I didn't talk at all about minerals, but it's important to have minerals. Do strategic body condition scoring throughout the year. Pregnancy check and cull your open cows and keep good records. And if you strive to do a lot of these things, I would expect that your breeding or your reproduction program should improve. So the last thing I have here is profitability includes the unit cost of production. And so a lot of the beef economists really want to take a look at these three things: improve your reproductive efficiency, which is what we talked about tonight, find a way to drive down your annual costs of having your cows, and then the other area we didn't really talk about is weaning weights, and find ways that we can increase the weaning weight or get more pounds in a shorter period of time. That should help us with the economics. So I'm going to pause here. Are there any quick questions on reproduction before I move into the second half of our talk?
Hi guys, this is Megan. I have a question about going into winter, and I think I know the answer, but wouldn't that greatly affect where we would want our cows if we do kind of a fall winter breeding? Wouldn't we want them a little going into winter on the higher end of that body condition score side of things, or doesn't it really matter?
No, I think it does matter. That's an excellent question. And yes, I would want them to be more of that 6 and less of that 5, because we know that they're going to be lactating. They're going to have to deal with weather and our weather. They might have to deal with mud. We have pretty tough winters here for cattle to survive outside. So the other half of that equation is we want to go into that with them as good of condition as we can without being too fat. And then we have to take a look at our nutrition program and make sure that we're feeding for all of those additional environmental stressors. Fortunately, we have the ability to do this, and we can take a look at temperature, the conditions, the amount of mud they have to walk through, the amount of elevation if you're having them walk between where they're getting water and where you're feeding, for example. We can look at all of those things and calculate a diet that will keep the animals in the condition they want, producing the amount of milk that we want, and being able to thrive in the tough environmental conditions that we have. So we'd be upping the energy values in our feed primarily.
Thank you.